This Mercury retrograde of August of 2024 is easily the worst and the most frustrating Mercury retrograde we have all of this year. Mercury is going to be retrograde from August 4th to August 28th of 2024, but it's going to be in shadow from July 16th all the way to September 11th. So we have about a good 2-month window of Mercury retrograde issues. And in this video, I'm going to go over why this Mercury retrograde is so frustrating, all of the problems that are with it as well. At the end of this video, I'm going to be going over how exactly it's going to be affecting your zodiac sign. If you haven't met me before, my name is Cam Wyatt. I'm a professional astrologer. I've been doing this for over 8 years. I've seen literally thousands of clients. And of course, I have hundreds of videos. And if you like to keep up to date with the current transiting astrology, make sure you subscribe to never miss out on what is going on. So like I said before, Mercury is going to be retrograde from August 4th to August 28th of 2024. And Mercury is going to station retrograde at 4 degrees Virgo, and it's going to station direct at 21 degrees Leo. So what that means is if you have any planets in that area between 4 Virgo and 21 Leo, you're going to be affected the most out of this. Or even more so, if you have planets between 4 degrees and 21 degrees of both the mutable and the fixed signs. So that's going to be Gemini, Virgo, Sag, and Pisces, or Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. If you have any planets in that area, that means Mercury is going to be squaring those planets or conjoining it or going opposite it. So you will see this Mercury retrograde affect you even more. But what's so interesting about this Mercury retrograde to me is not necessarily just Mercury being retrograde, but all of the transits that happen in the same timeline that Mercury is retrograde. If you watched my year ahead horoscopes that I put out last year, or if you keep up to date with the weeklies that I post, then you know that I've been talking about August being the most frustrating month of the year. Now, as an astrologer, it's difficult to talk about this stuff because when I say something is frustrating, people think, oh, it's bad, it's going to be the worst month ever, and that I'm just fear-mongering. And that's not what I'm saying. A lot of August in this Mercury retrograde is like trying to get ready for a road trip, but you woke up late, you can't find your cell phone, you end up leaving a little bit late, you run out of gas, and you end up hitting traffic that you weren't anticipating. You're still gonna get where you wanna go, but the way that you wanted to get there is not exactly what you expected and what you anticipated. It's gonna be easy to get frustrated or overwhelmed because there's gonna be delays, there's gonna be miscommunications. And that's what a Mercury retrograde is all about, like miscommunications, delays, and changing plans. And so the way I want you to think about going into August is just like, hey, you might have all these plans, you might have all of these things that you want to get done. They're not going to get done in the way that you want them to. They might take a little bit longer. There might be some problems with it, and there might be some delays. And that's okay. You just have to anticipate that and be able to be fluid and work with it. Because the more that we try to control a situation, just want it to go our way, the more of these problems are going to come up. And the big thing about astrology is like, hey, we have a roadmap of understanding what the future looks like. If you're going to get frustrated or triggered over little things not going the way that you want them to, that's not good. You want to be able to look at this and say, okay, things may not go the way that I want to. Let me just anticipate that and be a little bit more open so I'm not so emotionally volatile to things that are outside of my control. So let's start talking about the major highlights of this Mercury retrograde. So Mercury enters shadow on July 16th at 21 degrees Leo. So when Mercury enters shadow, this is the period where you're going to see a lot of the Mercury retrograde themes come up. A lot of people even talk about the Mercury shadow period being even worse than the Mercury retrograde period. For example, Mercury in shadow might be when, you drop your phone, you break your screen, things start glitching out. And it's not until the retrograde period where you go to the phone repair shop and get everything fixed. But it's during that shadow period that you're going to see all of the little problems come up, and you're going to start seeing what this Mercury retrograde is going to be about. Now, why I find the day that Mercury goes into shadow really interesting is because the day before, on July 15th, is when we have Mars conjoining Uranus. Like I said, if you've watched my weeklies or my year ahead videos, I've talked a lot about the Mars-Uranus conjunction as a really disruptive, really frustrating transit. And I find it interesting that we have the Mars-Uranus conjunction where there's like disruption, there's all these problems, things don't go your way, fights and conflicts, and then immediately after, Mercury enters shadow. So what that tells me as an astrologer is that Mars-Uranus conjunction is going to set the events that this Mercury retrograde will be about. So as we move forward with Mercury in shadow, we then get to July 21st, and this is when Mercury makes a square to Uranus. This is a big deal in my opinion, and I think the main reason why this Mercury retrograde is going to be so frustrating. Because again, Uranus is disruptions, things not going to plan, things being disrupted, things being, kind of innovative and like liberating at times. But the square aspect is is like things not working in harmony with one another, things, having tension. And if Mercury is the way that we communicate and logistics and plans and ideas, and it squares Uranus, there might be some sort of event that you weren't anticipating that kind of shakes up your plans. And again, Mercury squares Uranus at 26 degrees Leo and Taurus on July 21st. And this is one of 3 Mercury-Uranus squares that we're going to get throughout this time. So Mercury will literally square Uranus while it's in shadow. It'll go retrograde, square Uranus again, station direct, and then square Uranus. So there's a lot of disruption during this Mercury retrograde. So July 26th is one of my main highlights for this Mercury retrograde, although Mercury is still in shadow at this point, and we're still building context. Then on July 25th is when Mercury ingresses into Virgo. Now, this is nice. Mercury loves being in Virgo. It is both in its domicile and exalted in the sign of Virgo, which essentially means Mercury has access to all of the tools that it needs to get its job done. Mercury's job is, again, communicating, making plans, being rational. And in Virgo, there's this like level of specificity, this level of like clear and concise communication. I always look at Virgo as like the sign of black and white text, like what is literally on paper, what is written in ink. And what's nice about this is Mercury squares Uranus, right? There's like this major disruption, but then Mercury goes into Virgo where this allows us time to get more organized, to be a little bit more detailed, to really sit down, look at our paperwork and be like, okay, what is going on? What is this? What is that? Why did this happen? The only caveat to this is Mercury is slowing down. So a Mercury retrograde is just the time when Mercury is coming from the other side of the sun and starting to make its way in between the sun and the earth. It is simply an optical illusion. But because of that optical illusion, it appears as if Mercury is not moving that fast. And as we get to this point where Mercury is getting really close to stationing retrograde, it's moving really, really slow. And the way to interpret that is like Mercury's in Virgo, right? We have all the access to the paperwork, the documents, the organization, but it's a lot. We have to really go through the text and the details. It's like signing a contract. Like if you have like a 100-page contract, you're reading every little tiny paragraph of everything that it says and you got questions about it. It takes some time. But then we actually get to August 4th, and that is when Mercury stations retrograde. It's going to station retrograde at 9:56 p.m. So late in the evening, late at night on August 4th, Pacific Standard Time at 4 degrees Virgo. So what I do like about Mercury actually stationing retrograde is, again, the Mercury in shadow period always ends up being more problematic. It's like, this isn't working, that isn't working. But when Mercury goes retrograde, it's like, okay, I need to go take my phone to the repair shop. I need to actually reboot my computer. But a Mercury retrograde is taking steps backwards. It is re-looking at our plans, re-navigating our plans and saying, okay, here's the detailed list of what I wanted to get done. Let me go back through this and see what worked, what didn't work. What did I have a higher expectation of? What did I think I can do, but not actually end up doing? So then as Mercury goes retrograde, we get to our next highlight, which is on August 7th, Mercury will be conjoining Venus. Now, Mercury and Venus are always relatively close to one another, so it's not all of that crazy that Mercury will be conjoining Venus during this retrograde. But it is a nice little touch. Venus is about fun, pleasure, connection, relationships, and Venus doesn't do all that well in Virgo. Venus in Virgo reminds me of just like nitpicking your looks, nitpicking food, and just being like, you can't indulge or enjoy anything because of the tiny details that you can be overemphasizing. But Mercury retrograde is a time to rethink things. Steve Jobs has a really famous quote, which is literally think different. And Steve Jobs is a Virgo rising, so he's ruled by Mercury and has Mercury retrograde in Aquarius. So Mercury retrogrades are an excellent time to, again, think about things differently. And as Mercury is retrograde conjoining Venus, this might be rethinking like, hey, what do you not enjoy? Why don't you enjoy this? Can you actually be more open-minded to something? Venus in Virgo reminds me of like a kid who doesn't like their vegetables or doesn't want to eat their vegetables. I'm still that kid. However, Mercury retrograde conjoining Venus is like, okay, well, what if you tried it in some nice sauce? What if you tried it prepared differently? How can we get you to like this thing or enjoy this thing without being too nitpicky about it by having you rethink it, changing the way that you go about it? So on August 7th, there is an opportunity to rethink things, especially related to fun, pleasure, connection. And again, that might be a good thing. Like, all right, I want to rethink how I'm doing this thing that I don't enjoy in order to enjoy it. Or that might be rethinking something of like, hey, I thought I liked this, but actually I really don't like this. So then a week later, literally 7 days later, we get to August 14th. And I really want you to circle the week of August 12th to August 17th of 2024. This is the most frustrating week of the year, and let's go into it. Number one, on August 14th, Mercury will retrograde back into Leo. So the difference between Mercury in Leo and Mercury in Virgo is Mercury in Leo is just not afraid to say anything, saying it with your chest, saying it with some bravado. But Mercury in Virgo is being very peculiar and very specific with its words. Mercury retrograde in Leo might be you rethinking, hey, why did I say everything that I said? Why did I say it so loud and proud? Mercury retrograde in Leo might be trying to yell, but you lost your voice. And so we see a big dynamic shift with the Mercury retrograde on August 14th, but there's another transit that's really important. And on August 14th, we're going to be having Mars conjoin Jupiter. Mars is now in Gemini at this point with Jupiter in Gemini. Again, both of these planets are in the sign ruled over by Mercury. So a good way to look at it is whatever Mercury is doing is more influencing Jupiter and Mars at this time. But a Mars-Jupiter conjunction is like a blow up. It's an explosion. Jupiter expands whatever it touches. And Mars causes fights, conflict, separation, inflammation, cutting. And it is action and energy and drive too. But Mars conjoining Jupiter is just, you've taken on too much. Mars in Gemini is trying to do too many things at once. It's like the jack of all trades and master of none. But when you conjoin Jupiter, it's like, if you're a juggler, like let's say you're a clown or something like that, how many balls can you juggle? How many bowling pins can you juggle? What's the max? Is it 7? Is it 8? Well, if it's 7, you can't do 15. That's the vibe of this Mars-Jupiter conjunction is things blowing out of proportion. You have taken on too much. And I think it's interesting that Mercury retrogrades back into Leo during this time where this might be a big look at like, why did I think I could take on this much? Why did I think I could say all these things, all this loud and proud? But when it actually comes to, laying the rubber down to the road, this is a little bit too much for me to juggle. So we have the Mars-Jupiter conjunction and Mercury retrograding into Leo on the same day. Now, 2 days later, on August 16th, Mars is then going to square Saturn. So again, this isn't necessarily related to the Mercury retrograde, but this is happening at the same time. And a Mars-Saturn square is like hitting gas and hitting brakes at the same time. Mars wants to go forward, Mars wants to go fast, but Saturn is about slowing down and stopping. And these two planets are making a not harmonious aspect with one another. Mars wants to keep moving forward, but Saturn is saying you need to slow it down a little bit. So there's this really big frustrating energy where you want to go really fast on the 16th, but you just can't, whether that's because of your own energy or outside circumstances. But then 2 days later, so like I said, this August 12th through like the 17th time is like really the most frustrating week of the year. But then we get to the halfway point of the Mercury retrograde, which is the Mercury cazimi. A lot of people get really lost in this word cazimi. It's just a phrase for the term Mercury is conjoining the sun. It's on its interior conjunction. This is the halfway point of the Mercury retrograde. What a lot of the Mercury retrograde cazimi is literally like, oh, that was the problem. You had problems with your phone on the retrograde. You bring it into the phone shop. The phone shop guy calls you on the Mercury cazimi and is like, oh, hey, did you put this in the washer? Did you do something where there's just dust in here? It's actually not that big of an issue. You figure out what the issue is. However, this Mercury cazimi is also happening when Mercury squares Uranus. So this is kind of like, oh, here's the information, here's the solution, here's the answer, and it's going to disrupt what you thought the answer was or what the solution was. And so it is a big light bulb moment. It will shake things up. However, it's the halfway point of the Mercury retrograde where from here on out, things do get a lot easier. And on August 18th, as we have that Mercury retrograde squaring Uranus, there's just going to be another delay and another disruption that you weren't anticipating. And you are allowed to be upset and mad about things not going your way or there being delays. But does that help you at all? Does that assist you in getting to where you want to go? Or can you just say, okay, that sucks, but what can I do in the meantime? What can I enjoy here in this moment? So then that's on August 18th. The next day, on August 19th, is when we have Jupiter making a square to Saturn. So again, this isn't relative to the Mercury retrograde. It is in a Mercury ruled sign, but this is a kind of a really big deal transit that happens during this time that I think is interesting to talk about. So if you've watched a lot of my videos, I talked about in 2020, there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Long story short, those are really, really big deals. And that one in 2020 was a very, very big deal, setting up like what the timeline looks like for the literal next 200 years. This Jupiter-Saturn square is like the quarter phase of what started in 2020. But the quick way I'm going to interpret this is Saturn is about limitations, authority, reality, and discipline. It is in the sign of Pisces. Pisces is very spiritual. It is religious, but it's internal. So Saturn in Pisces is kind of saying like, hey, where are your internal blocks spiritually? Where do you need to be more disciplined on the internal level spiritually or religiously? But Saturn is in Pisces, and Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. And Jupiter is in the sign of Gemini. If you haven't watched my Jupiter and Gemini video, that will help make a lot of this make a lot more sense. Go ahead and check that out. But Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini. It doesn't work all that well. And so a lot of Jupiter and Gemini is realizing where our faith or where our beliefs are too caught up in rational logistics and not actually practicing faith. And so as Jupiter makes this square to Saturn, this is that connection, that light bulb moment of like, oh, my beliefs or my worldview or the way that I'm doing things isn't working. And that's why I like this Mercury retrograde, is this is a big reality hit. Like, you might be wrong about certain things, and that's not a bad thing, because again, you might have like shitty beliefs, or you might have a belief that is actually harming you and that isn't doing good. And it's at this moment where you kind of go, oh, why do I believe it? Why do I believe that? Am I getting anything out of that? Is that helping me? Is that assisting me anywhere? And so August 19th is a really big reality check. And then we get to August 23rd. This is when Mercury, again, is still retrograde in Leo, and it makes a little sextile to Mars in Gemini. I like this. This is a little bit of a confidence boost. This is like, okay, Mercury's retrograde in Leo. Let me hype myself up a little bit. Let me rethink and reshape my own willpower and my identity. And sextiling Mars in Gemini is like a pumping yourself up in the green room before a big performance. And then we get to August 28th, Mercury stations direct, and we come back to what was going on July 16th. So on July 16th, what was going on? By the time we get to August 28th, we're right back to that area. We're solving that issue. We have addressed that. Now we just have to move forward with all the other plans that we already had to begin with. So not much happens for about a week there until about September 6th. And then September 6th is when Mercury squares Uranus for the third and final time. But this time is different. You've already had two of these, squares. You've already had these major disruptions. What's another one? Is it really going to offend you? Is it really going to piss you off all that much? Or you're like, you know what? Things don't always go according to plan. I'm going to laugh it off because I was anticipating this. For example, my Wi-Fi has been out for a long time. It keeps going in and out. And I finally had someone come over to fix it. They said they fixed it, and it's still having the same problem. And rather than being like, even though it's really easy to get upset, I'm like, I'm just anticipating this at this moment. Like, of course it's not going to work. Like, of course it's some other issue. But again, rather than letting it affect me, I'm just going to keep going on my day to day. And then we get to September 9th, and this is when Mercury goes back into Virgo. And I think this is a really big sigh of relief. Mercury is now exalted in its home sign. It is now a morning star. There's just a lot more of like, okay, I can understand what I'm reading here. Again, maybe you're signing a contract for something that you don't understand. So you had to do a lot of research on, this area of specificity. And now Mercury's back in Virgo, where you have a little bit of understanding of what you're signing and why you're signing it and what it all means. Mercury just going back into Virgo, I just think is a lot more refreshing. We have a lot more of a clearer mind on things, and we can understand things a lot more clearly. And then we get to September 11th, and that's when Mercury leaves shadow, and we're all done with this Mercury retrograde. So like I said, there's a lot to be had here. And again, make sure you comment below and let me know what your plans are or what you're anticipating for this Mercury retrograde. But now let's go ahead and start talking about how this Mercury retrograde is going to be affecting your rising sign. So for the Aries risings, Mercury is going to be retrograding in your 6th house of work, health, more specifically ill health, employment, like the labor that goes into your job, coworkers, employees, as well as pets. Because Mercury rules this area, this is where you're going to see a lot more of a delay. But Mercury will retrograde back into your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, and recreation. So maybe a lot of this is like changing up your schedule to involve more play and more fun, or you've got some issues with your kids that put some delays related to your work. Mercury also rules your 3rd house of short distance travel, siblings, neighbors, and communication. And that's where that Mars-Jupiter conjunction is happening at. So this might be issues related to a car, with your neighbors, or just your overall schedule, dealing with things related to work, taking on too much at once, having to be at point A at one time and point B at another time, and it's just hard to balance it all. And again, this might involve stuff related to children or, again, recreation and fun. Mercury will also be squaring Uranus, and Uranus is in your 2nd house of money, finances, and resources. So this might be an unexpected expense related to, again, either work and health or children and love and romance. For the Taurus risings, Mercury is going to be retrograding in your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, recreation, and children. So there's some sort of a rethinking of this area, some sort of a delay in this area. But Mercury will go back into Leo, and Leo rules your fourth house of home and family and living situation. So again, this might be, if you have children, this might be a problem with one of your kids related to your parents, or again, something like your child's bedroom window got broke, and so now they have to sleep with you for a while or something along those lines. Mercury going back into your fourth house retrograde is going to cause some issues with your family and your living situation, especially as Mercury squares Uranus. Uranus is in your first house of you, your identity, and yourself. And as Mercury retrogrades in your fourth, there's going to be maybe a disruption with your parents, an argument with your parents, or again, some sort of a delay or issue related to your home and your family. Mars is also going to be conjoining Jupiter in your second house of money, finances, and resources, so this might also involve a pretty big expense. For the Gemini risings, I think this one's going to be hitting you guys the most because Mercury is going to be retrograding in your fourth house of home and family and living situation. So there might be some miscommunications or some delays regarding your home, or a miscommunication related to your parents. And Mercury is going to be going back into Leo. Leo rules your third house of neighbors, siblings, short distance travel, as well as communication. But Mercury will be squaring Uranus once it goes back into Leo. Uranus is in your 12th house of hidden enemies, the subconscious, fears, and phobias. And the reason this is a big deal for you is because you're ruled by Mercury. You're a Gemini rising. So you might be kind of like lashing out at this time, or just saying things that you really didn't mean, and there's a bunch of problems and drama. And add on top of that, Mars is going to be conjoining Jupiter in your first house. I think you're just going to be kind of pissed and pissy over this month. And I think that's okay. Just like give yourself room to do that and just try not to take it overboard, because I think you are just going to be really frustrated with everything that's going on. For the Cancer risings, Mercury is going to be retrograding in your third house of short distance travel, neighbors, siblings, things like your vehicle, communication, and kind of like how you manage your time. As Mercury goes retrograde here, there might be, again, car issue, your typical way that you go to work. There's a block there, or there's construction, so you have to take an alternative way. But Mercury will go back into your second house of money, finances, and resources. And it's going to be squaring Uranus, and Uranus is in your 11th house of friends. So this seems like, again, some delay with money, delay with finances, maybe that having to do with a friend, maybe loaning a friend some money, or a friend is borrowing something from you and they break it, so you kind of have to pay to fix it or something like that. There's just a big miscommunication, or again, a delay with money and finances during this time. And again, it also might be car related because Mercury's retrograding in your third house. The other part of this is Mars is conjoining Jupiter, and that's happening in your 12th house, and the 12th house rules subconscious, fears, phobias, hidden enemies, self-sabotage. It's really like the back of your head. And I just feel like you're going to be kind of like putting off your anger and putting it on the back burner, not really like putting it out. Like I said, this is the most frustrating Mercury retrograde this year. And I just wonder how many of you guys are internalizing it and not finding a good outlet to express any anger. And again, I just think the more literal delineation of this is you're just going to have some like money issues. And again, you're not going to go broke forever, but this is like an unexpected expense. For the Leo risings, Mercury is going to be retrograding in your second house of money, finances, and resources. So number one, you're going to see an issue related to money. So again, maybe that's a delay in your paycheck. Maybe that's an expense that you weren't anticipating, or you ended up just kind of blowing money that, you just felt like doing. Mercury is then going to go back into your first house of you, yourself, and your identity. Now, as Mercury is retrograde in Leo, you might say something that you didn't mean, or you might communicate something that comes off a bad way. Mercury is going to square Uranus in your 10th house of career. So this is going to cause a disruption related to your work and your career. Now, Mercury also rules your 11th house of friends and community. And as your 11th ruler of friends and community, Mercury is retrograding your first house of you. There might be a miscommunication or some sort of drama related to friends and you. Add on top of that, Mars is going to be conjoining Jupiter in your 11th house of friends. So this might be a big blow up between friends, getting too combative with friends, taking on too much. And so I think what you're really going to see is, again, some sort of delay with money, and that's going to cause some stress at work. You might kind of lash out, or there might be, again, some sort of drama that creates some upheaval with work, as well as you'll see that related to friends. For the Virgo risings, you and Gemini risings got a lot going on here that I think is going to affect you the most. Mercury is retrograding in your first house of you, yourself, your identity, and Mercury rules over your 10th house of career, and it also rules your first house of you. You're going to miscommunicate something. You're going to like fuck up your time. You're going to fuck up your schedule. There's going to be a really different way that you kind of see yourself. You might be kind of told something that might make you a little bit insecure, because Mercury is going to go back into your 12th house. The 12th house rules the subconscious, fears, phobias. And as Mercury goes into your 12th house, you might be kind of doing some self-sabotage, maybe lashing out a little bit. And Mercury squaring Uranus is like this is going to be kind of like a drama or a major battle between like your own self-sabotaging like habits and your own beliefs about yourself, and kind of like you trying to figure out like, okay, what do I actually believe? Can I liberate myself from these shitty beliefs, or am I just going to like withdraw and go in sabotage mode? And you add that on top of Mars conjoining Jupiter in your 10th house. I think you're just going to be taking on too much work. There's going to be kind of a big blow up with your work and your job, and you might have to kind of reorganize some things to where you can kind of take some space and some time to isolate yourself a little bit. I think you guys do need a little bit of a break by the end of all of this. For the Libra risings, Mercury is first going to go retrograde in Virgo in your 12th house. The 12th house rules the subconscious, fears, phobias, isolation, and alienation. So there is this kind of like rethinking of like your own belief systems and how you get in your own way. And that could easily be a good thing. It could also just be kind of a confusing thing, especially as Mercury goes retrograde into your 11th house of friends and communities. The 12th house rules hidden enemies, and Mercury rules over it, and it's going into your 11th house of friends and communities. So you might kind of figure out, hey, are all of my friends my friends? Are certain people I keep around myself aren't my friend? Mercury is also going to be squaring Uranus. Uranus is in your 8th house of other people's money and shared resources. So there's going to be some disruption and some upheaval going on between shared resources and your friends. Now, add this on top of Mars conjoining Jupiter in your 9th house. A lot of this is kind of questioning your beliefs, shaking your fist at God. You might be getting really involved into spirituality and stuff, or you might be doing a lot of travel, and all of that travel might just get you a little bit tired. You might get a little bit sick. There's just a lot going on for the space of like travel and spirituality that makes you kind of like have to slow down because you're doing too much. For the Scorpio risings, Mercury is retrograding in your 11th house of friends and community and networks, but it will retrograde back into your 10th house of Leo, which is all about career and reputation and legacy. So you are going to see a miscommunication related to friends and some sort of delay in miscommunication related to career. Now, Mercury, when it goes back into Leo, is going to square Uranus. So there's going to be a big disruption related to a certain individual. Uranus is in your 7th house of relationships and your work and your career. So again, that might be a coworker, that might be your boss, or again, you might feel like you're just ready to walk out of the door of your job. There's a lot of upheaval going on here. But Mars is going to be conjoining Jupiter in Gemini. This is in your 8th house, and Mercury also rules your 8th house. So Mars conjoining Jupiter in your 8th house is going to be kind of like taking on too much debt, or having too much access to other people's resources, or being too responsible for everybody else's stuff. And this might involve friends, because Mercury rules your 8th house of other people's resources, and it's retrograding in your 11th house of friends, networks, and communities. But Mercury is also going into your 10th house. So maybe you're taking on too much responsibility with other people's resources related to your work, and maybe you need to delegate some of that stuff. For the Sag risings, Mercury rules both your 7th house of relationships and your 10th house of career. But Mercury is going to retrograde in your 10th house of career. So there's going to be some delay, change of plans regarding work. But then Mercury goes back into your 9th house of spirituality, religion, publishing, broadcasting, social media. And there is going to be this like rethinking how you put yourself out there, what your beliefs are, especially when Mercury goes into Leo. It's going to be squaring Uranus. Uranus is in your 6th house of health, day-to-day activities, and labor. And so as your 10th ruler of career is squaring Uranus in your 6th house of labor, there's like a lot of disruptions with your schedule, your work, your habits, because of whether that's traveling, whether that's teaching, whether that's just like social media stuff. Now, when it comes to relationships, Mars is also going to be conjoining Jupiter in your 7th house. So there looks like there's going to be some sort of a big conflict related to relationships here. That might involve a fight, a conflict, or just kind of being too involved in a relationship. And as your 7th ruler goes retrograde, this might be a time of rethinking this relationship, or at least miscommunications within the relationship. For the Capricorn risings, Mercury is going to be retrograding in your 9th house of spirituality, religion, social media, publishing, broadcasting. So there's going to be a rethinking of this area and possibly a delay. But then Mercury is going to go retrograde back into Leo in your 8th house of other people's money and shared resources, death, debt, and inheritance. And when Mercury does go back into your 8th house and there's some delays or some rethinking of other people's resources, it's going to be squaring Uranus. Uranus is in your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, and recreation, and children. So there might be kind of a disruption. Again, like an analogy I can think of is like, let's say you have a baby daddy, you guys are like divorced. This is like a delay with child support, or, you know, a delay or a change in like visitation hours kind of a thing. Like that's how I would interpret it. And I know, of course, it's not going to be appropriate for everyone, but you can kind of take that analogy and apply it to your own life. Add on top of that, Mercury rules your 6th house of Gemini. The 6th house is about work, labor, schedule, ill health, pets, employees, and it's also going to be retrograding in your 8th house. So this might be, again, delays with your work, issues regarding like investments and other people's resources related to your work. And the Mars-Jupiter conjunction is happening in your 6th house. So there is some sort of a big blow up or, again, possibly an injury, taking on too much work and just being so busy that you can't even handle the Mercury retrograde stuff going on. For the Aquarius risings, Mercury is going to be retrograding in your 8th house of other people's money, shared resources, death, debt, and inheritance. So there is like a reframing of this area, but Mercury will go back into your 7th house of relationships. So this will involve a miscommunication with a relationship with some individual. That might be a spouse, that might just be someone important. And Mercury, when it goes back into Leo in your 7th house, is going to square Uranus. Uranus is in your 4th house of home and family and living situation. So there is a major disruption going on between a relationship and your living situation during this time. Now, add on top of that, Mars is conjoining Jupiter in your 5th house. The 5th house is love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, recreation, and children. And Mars conjoining Jupiter is like, there's way too many things going on here. There's a lot of, you're investing too much time. Plus, there's a lot of problems going on in this 5th house area. And Mercury rules your 5th house of love, romance, and sex. And it's retrograding in your 7th house of relationships. So this might be like kind of a weird time to like refigure out romanticism and connection and intimacy regarding relationships. That's a big way that I see it. And that might bring some, weird energy regarding like you guys living together. For the Pisces risings, Mercury is going to be retrograding in your 7th house of relationships. Now, Mercury rules your 7th house of relationships. So this will involve a miscommunication, a delay, or a change in the way that you speak with a significant relationship. Mercury will go back into your 6th house of work, health, day-to-day activities, employment, labor, as well as pets. And as Mercury goes retrograde in your 6th house, this is going to be changing up your work, your labor, and your routines. Now, Mercury also rules your 4th house of home and family and living situation. So if you take, 7th house of relationships, 4th ruler of home and family, retrograding in your 6th house of work and labor, there seems to be a change with people and your living situation regarding your work and your labor and your routines. Add on top of that, Mars is going to be conjoining Jupiter in your 4th house. And this might involve kind of a big blow up or some issues regarding your home and your family or even your parents. But Mercury, while it goes back into your 6th house, is going to be squaring Uranus, which is in your 3rd house of, again, communication, short distance travel, neighbors. So again, there might be some issues with your neighbors. There might be issues with your local area, your community that messes up your work, that makes you kind of rethink your living situation. And that's the majority of it. So for the 3 people that made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you guys so much for watching. Comment below. Let me know what you're looking forward to. Let me know if you're going to look at this Mercury retrograde any differently and not just be afraid of it. And make sure you subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with all of the major events going on in the sky. And with that being said, I'll be seeing you guys next time.